Longtime NFL columnist as well. So we'll talk a lot of football now with John McMullen, of course, here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline as he joins us on a Tuesday. John, what's up, my man?
How are you guys?
We are doing well as Coordinator Day. Very interesting as we are now a couple of weeks into the coordinators. And Jim Schwartz, we'll start with him first because I guess he made a little bit of the news, I guess, kind of, I don't want to say defying, but no changes coming. Mills won the Super Bowl playing that position. He stays. Is that the message of today's press conference with Schwartz?
That was a big message because I think a lot of people, obviously fans, are upset.
Was he annoyed? Was he? I didn't see him, so I'm just reading transcripts.
No.
Was he annoyed?
No, not at all. In fact, I was expecting a more combative Jim Schwartz. He was actually pretty engaging today, so the loss not having a terrible effect from that perspective. And he's always been a big Jalen Mills supporter, so it's absolutely no surprise that he would continue to support him at this point. It's too early in the season. If you know anything about Jim, doesn't like a lot of moving parts. The whole sort of theme behind this defense is to make it as simple as possible so guys can play as fast as possible. And anytime you have moving parts, that slows everything down. The one thing he did say, however, was that you probably can't continue at the number of snaps Corey Graham played at this stage of his career. Wow. So you might see a downtick in workload, especially if they're on the field that much for Corey Graham, and that means more for Avonte Maddox, who was the big surprise over the weekend as the safety sort of bumped up into the typical Corey Graham role. Now Corey is obviously inserted for the injured Rodney McLeod.
So what are the options there? I mean, everybody says Mills, everybody says Douglas. Are they options? Do they have guys that we don't know? Are they today's workout day? Typically, they bring the free agents off the street in. Are there guys coming in, running around without helmets and pads on? What are the options if Graham gets cut back?
Well, the option is Avonte plays more. They did work out two safeties, but that's not going to help you. Yesterday, on Monday, DeAndre Hall, who they traded for at the cutdown from Chicago, is also here. But if you listen to Jim at all about Avonte Maddox, he likes him at that particular position. And I think it shows you the shift in the NFL because that's a small guy playing safety. But the reality is the days of Cam Chancellor are over. I mean, you don't need an intimidating presence back there because who are you going to intimidate? You're not allowed to do anything. So it's shifted toward coverage, and they've said this back during training camp or even during the offseason. They love the coverage ability of Avonte Maddox.
Yeah, and we saw him kind of get beat, and you talked about it yesterday. You get a guy like Corey Davis, who's 6'3", a big physical receiver, and Maddox had a little trouble, trying to stick with him.
Yeah, he did. I mean, it's the first time he's playing, obviously, on the defensive side of the ball as a rookie. He slipped a little bit in coverage, but you did see some good things, and the fact that he was able to recover, he was in the area. But, I mean, that could have happened if he was playing corner as well. I mean, that's sort of the issue you have with these big, rangy receivers. And the Eagles have seen a lot of them early in the season with Julio Jones and Mike Evans and now Corey Davis. It's just – and, by the way, you saw it from the Titans' perspective with Alshon Jeffrey. It's difficult to deal with those guys.
Hey, John, Eitan Shander, just curious if this has come up at all. And I know on the road it's a little different because both games it's been hot. Tampa Bay was brutally bad with the weather. Tennessee still hot. But it looks like this defense is gassed. Is there any concern with that this early in the season?
No, I don't think so. For the most part, in fact, the Eagles had been showing better conditioning than their opponents, maybe because it's been so hot and humid up here. But it's always a concern when you're on the field and when you're sort of leaking oil. Jim Schwartz talks about themes. Every game has a personality. And that one late sort of turned, and everybody was going up and down the field. So they were disappointed. But if you look at all the fourth downs, and Jim harped on the 4th and 15, as everybody should, and that was wildly disappointing. That's what he called it. And that's just bad situational football. I don't think it had anything to do with being gassed. It was just a matter of fact that they didn't understand the situation. They didn't play it right.
John, what do you think? You mentioned situational football, and I was going to ask you to talk about what you have seen from them in certain situations, not just this past week, but all 4 weeks. And how are they going to work on that for this week against a good Vikings team and a team that's really seeking revenge here coming off the playoff loss last year?
Yeah, I kind of said it yesterday. I don't think it is a good team. I think people lean. This league changes so quickly. I think this is the perfect opponent at the perfect time for the Eagles because they have, as I said yesterday on the show, probably the worst offensive line through the first quarter of this season. The Eagles obviously have a very good defensive line. They struggle with pre-snap motion. The Eagles are one of those teams. They're not quite the Chiefs, but they're right there with the Chiefs and the Rams and the Bears when it comes to pre-snap motion. So everything kind of falls. So if we're talking at this time next week and they lose this game, then I think it's time to push the panic button. But I don't think that's going to happen. I really don't, because this is just, as I said, the perfect opponent for them at the perfect time. And, hey, I talked about it a little yesterday. Corey Graham, a 33-year-old guy, he's won 2 Super Bowls. He's played a lot of football. He's not going to make that mistake time and time and time again. And Eitan was talking about gas. Maybe you can say one player was gassed. Maybe Corey Graham was gassed because he played 71 snaps, and he's 33, and he's used to playing 20 to 30. So maybe that comes into it. But I don't see that as a trend.
Yeah, and you look at the offense that comes to town here and with Kirk Cousins and looking specifically at the Vikings, you would like to think, based on how this defense has looked different home and away, that pressure would be the first and most important thing here to kind of open things up and make it easier for the D-backs and just getting to Kirk Cousins, something that they have been able to do at times, but more importantly now than maybe the first 4 weeks of the season, John.
Yeah, and that's where you expect it, and they should be able to get pressure, and they should be able to get pressure with 4 guys. They shouldn't even have to blitz, and obviously that's what Jim wants. Doesn't necessarily work that way. Certainly didn't work that way in Tennessee, which had 2 really good tackles. This is the exact opposite. I tweeted out today, this is almost astonishing. Pro up 80 pressures in 4 games. Typically, a typical NFL team gives up 160 in a year. So they're on pace to double that. That's how bad that offensive line is. And the Eagles have a top 5 defensive line. And that's why I'm talking about this is the perfect matchup for them.
Yeah, one thing's interesting, we talk about not getting the same pressure. Is that, last night I'm watching the Chiefs or Denver, I should say, against the Chiefs, obviously. They're up in their face, and they're sending pressure. They're basically saying, let me see if Mahomes how accurate you really are. Now, in the beginning of the game, you can make an argument that Mahomes was not sharp. He was off a little bit, and I thought they were sending a lot up the middle, and they had those corners up and challenging them. It seems that Schwartz is never willing to show that different look. Is that just because he doesn't trust his personnel to cover like that?
No, I think Jim does more than most defensive coordinators. I think people get caught up in the blitz. Everybody wants to be aggressive. Everybody loves when the blitz gets home. But I remind you, first play against Tampa Bay, that was a blitz. Didn't work out too well. Corey Davis over Avonte Maddox, that was a 0 blitz. That was man-to-man coverage. He brought the house. Didn't work out too well because you have a 5'9" corner on a 6'3" receiver. If you're blitzing, you give up something on the back end, and sometimes it doesn't work out. And that's why he, like every defensive coordinator, he's no different than any defensive coordinator. They want to get pressure with 4. If they can't, then you got to start bringing 5. If you can't get it with 5, you got to start bringing 6, and you got to start gambling.
And their plan is, John, they believe they don't have to blitz because they think they have the guys up front that they don't need to blitz. And that's been the disconnect, really, it seems like.
Yeah, well, as I said, typically they get more pressure than the average NFL team. There's no question about that. That's been the case this year. I think I talk about it all the time. I think people get caught up in sacks. It's not necessarily sacks. Sometimes the pressure's better than the sack. If you go to the last time the Vikings played the Eagles, for instance, well, let's pretend Chris Long's hurry was a sack. Then the Vikings punt the ball. Who knows what happens from there? But a hurry turned into hitting the quarterback in the chest, the bad pass. Patrick Robinson intercepts it, rumbles into the end zone. They hear the noise over the river in the South Jersey. Game's over. Stole the heart of the Vikings in the NFC Championship game. If he sacks them, none of that good stuff happens. So pressure is important. If you don't get the sack, it's always good to get sacks, but it's not necessarily the end of the world if you speed up the quarterback. If you get them off the spots, that's the goal.
John, we're talking about pressure and aggressiveness from the defensive line and the front four and the blitz packages, but what about being aggressive in the secondary? Like, I think they're playing off, I know that they've been playing off 10, 12 yards a lot of times against these receivers. It just seems like they're being a little bit more safe through these first 4 games. Do I have anything to that, or do they need to be more aggressive?
Well, you have something to it against the Titans, and that's because Rodney wasn't there. They played a lot more cover 2 than they normally do, and that was because of the absence of Rodney McLeod. I don't think there was much of a difference the first 3 weeks from what they were last year, and I expect that to get incrementally better. But there's no question that they tried to play it safer than usual without Rodney McLeod, and at times, let's be honest, it didn't work.
Yeah, and John, I have to be honest, as much as we can lay out concerns with, and Ryan did with the secondary, and I agree, the offensive line has been intact. And the offensive line, when it comes to protection, and it's not just the 5 guys, the running backs as well, Wendell Smallwood blocking Jason Kelsey's butt on Sunday doesn't help. What needs to change immediately in order for this offensive line to get back to that unit that was good enough to protect even Nick Foles in that Super Bowl run?
Well, a couple things. I mean, 2 guys, the Jasons aren't healthy. Jason Peters, Jason Kelsey. And the Eagles have downplayed a knee injury for Jason Kelsey, but it's pretty clear he's laboring because they don't run outside zone now. And that's the strength of his game, is sort of getting outside and pulling, getting to the second level. So he's not healthy. Jason Peters has been dealing with that quad. He's 36 years old. There's another guy, if you want to talk about the heat and humidity early in the season, that's probably had an effect on him more than most. So I think they're not healthy. B, the second part is I think the Titans 3-4 front confused them a little bit. They're not used to seeing it. They haven't seen a 3-4 yet this season. That was the first time, and at times you don't know where the pass rush is coming from. So that was part B. And then C is some of the guys aren't playing. Lane Johnson is not playing as well as he did last season. He's not playing poorly, but he's not playing at that lights-out all-pro level. So I think it's a number of things.
They got interesting today, too. Mike Groh, the offensive coordinator, he spoke, and it sounded like, they were trying to get into a little like, hey, do you agree with the play calling? Did you get that Groh was they were trying to get Groh to go down the
I said this yesterday on the show, and I'll say it again, and I'll say it probably every day. Philadelphia's got this mentality. We're in there the 80s, and I don't know. They want Buddy Ryan on defense, and they want to run the football.
Yep.
And you cannot run the football consistently in this league today and expect to win consistently. So I said, if anything, if you want to talk run-pass ratio, it's always about the theme of the game. It's always about whether you're ahead in the fourth quarter or behind. But in this instance, if you want to criticize the Eagles for anything, criticize them being too cautious in the overtime when they had a chance to score a touchdown and end the game. And they ran it, in my estimation, too much in the overtime. They should have won for the kill shot. So, I think people are having a difficult time understanding what this modern NFL is about. And if you're trying to run it 35 times, I got news for you. 2-2 is going to fall to 7-9, 6-10. That's not going to work. It just isn't.
Well, how about then 53-20? Is that all right?
Look, anything's all right depending what the scoreboard says. So if you need 40 passes to win a shootout, then you win the shootout. Again, if you're ahead, and that's where you may be criticizing the fact that they had a 2-touchdown lead in the third quarter, do you try to milk things? Again, it's difficult in this league because if all of a sudden you go in a shell, you've seen the explosive offense all over. I mean, Denver was playing well defensively for most of the night, shutting down the most explosive team in football, and then boom, at the end of the game, right down the field, bang, 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 and they lose the football game. It's tough to play defense in this league for 60 minutes. It's just tough.
Yeah,
especially against good offensive teams.
And that's, I think, the issue that I had the most on Sunday was this team, John, has shown us right up through the previous week that they can control the clock, that they can go on long drives, and they can milk that clock even in the middle of the second quarter if need be, let alone in the end of the game. So they set their own expectations, and that's where I think they fell short specifically. But you're right. I mean, the overall theme of the game will dictate. I think the overall theme at that point dictated to run more.
Well, you're probably right. I mean, not in the overtime.
No. You're right on the overtime.
Quarter, I would agree with you.
Absolutely.
I would agree with you in the third quarter. Now, the thing I will say there, and this again is part of, and to the Eagles' credit, they have not complained about this at all. And perhaps because when you go back to the Indianapolis game and you have the 17-play drive, the 11-minute drive, well, there were 4 defensive penalties on that drive. That's sort of like playing at home. In this situation, people are complaining about Jalen Mills' pass interference. People are complaining about Sidney Jones on fourth down, extending drives. That's just part of it. I mean, that's part of what this league has become. And so when you talk about an 11-minute drive, it looks great on paper, but if you don't get those 4 penalties, that changes things drastically.
An 11-minute drive up 17-3 looks really good.
Yeah, well, but my point is you're not getting 4 defensive penalties on the road in this league. You're just not. It's not going to happen.
Of course, John McMullen here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Real quick before we roll out of here, we're at the quarter pole of the season. Just a couple bullet point NFL things that you've got your eye on through 4 games. Everybody's at the quarter pole here.
Well, we talked a lot, Mike, before the season started, how good and how deep the NFC was. We were wrong. Part of its injuries.
That's interesting, because you're right. I mean, we thought there was going to be this fist fight for jockeying for home field position, and it seems like there's the Rams, and then there's like a big drop-off.
Yeah, and everybody's been disappointing. I think Minnesota and Atlanta top that list. Atlanta more for just injuries. I mean, they've been crippled from an injury standpoint. New Orleans' record is good, but they have not been impressive. I thought they were going to be a legit Super Bowl contender. Maybe it comes around. And then the AFC, hey, Kansas City's much better than anyone expected, and they look like one of the top teams in football. Even Baltimore has looked really good, finally getting at least some receivers in there to help Joe Flacco. So the AFC looks a lot better than I thought it was going to be, and the NFC looks a lot worse.
All right, plenty more on tomorrow's show as we start to look ahead to Minnesota. John McMullen here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. And, of course, John McMullen, Jeff Mosher, Krause, Thursday night at the Landmark from 6 to 8. Mosher, McMullen, and Krause every Thursday, 6 to 8, right here on 97.3 ESPN. All right, Johnny, thanks, pal.
Hey, thanks, guys.